We begin today the Gemara on Daf Samaches, 4 lines down from the top of the Yamud. We're in the middle of a sugya discussing the halacha of noisin tam levgam. When something which is aser gives a flavor into foods that are mutter, the example in the Mishnah was yayin nesach, that falls onto grapes or dates or figs. So the Mishnah says the rule is if it gives a good flavor, tam l'shvach, it's going to be aser. But if it gives a bad taste, then it's going to be mutter. And the Gemara actually brought here that there's a machlokes between Rab Meir and Rab Shimon about this. Rab Meir says that it doesn't matter. Either way, it's going to be aser. And the Gemara before actually brought that it's based on a pasuk that you learn out from when they came from the Milchama by Midyan, and they had their pots and pans that had what was absorbed in the walls, and that flavor was a bad flavor, and it was still aser. They had to be kasher it. Mashenka Rab Shimon says if it's nice and tam levgam, if it gives a bad flavor, then it's not a problem. It's going to be mutter. That's the machlokes. So here the Gemara brings a machlokes amirayim between Ula and Rab Yochanan, how we understand this machlokes between Rab Meir and Rab Shimon. Zok the Gemara Omar Ula said machlokes sheish biach Ula b'soif poigim. The Bach says poigim, that in a case where the flavor that it gave originally was actually a good flavor, the Isser gave a good flavor. Only later does it go bad. Then, in this case, is a machlokes between Rab Shimon and Rab Meir, whether it'll be mutter or asar. The example the Gemara brought for this before was regarding beans. The Gemara said that when you pour vinegar, vinegar, let's say, that came from yayin nesach, you pour it on beans, so it depends. If you pour it on cold beans, then it actually gives it a good flavor. But if you'll take those beans and you'll heat it up, then the flavor will go bad. So that's an example where if you have yayin nesach on the cold beans and then you heat it up, that's first shbiach and then l'b'soif paigim. Here's where is the machlokes, whether it's going to be aser or not, because now it's a bad flavor. Originally it gave a good flavor, but now it turned bad. But if it's a case where it gave a bad flavor from the beginning, divrei hakol mutter. Here everybody will agree that this will be allowed. So Tosfos says that what this means is that Ula does not agree with the limud that I mentioned before that they learn out from the Kalim by Midyan. If you learn out from the pots and pans that they got by Midyan, from there, according to what the Gemara says before, you would see that even if it gave a bad flavor from the beginning, it should still be aser. So according to this pshat of Ula, we're not learning from there. Really, the isser that gets mixed in and causes isser is only if it gives a good flavor, shvach. The shaila is, what happens if that good flavor later goes bad? Do I look at the present and say that now it's only a bad flavor, so it'll be mutter? Or do I look at the way it was originally? Originally, it actually gave a good flavor, and therefore it's going to be aser. Rav Chag asks Ula on this pshat. It says in a braise, yayin shenafel atoich hadashim, wine that fell on beans or lentils, or v'chaimet shenafel atoich grisen, vinegar that fell on split beans, aser. It's going to be aser. But Rab Shimon matter, and Rab Shimon says it's allowed. So now the Gemara understands what's this case of this wine or vinegar that's falling on these lentils or beans. This is a case where as soon as the wine or vinegar that's aser falls onto these lentils or beans, it gives a bad taste from the beginning. It's a nice and tam levgam. Upligi, and I see here that the Tanakama, which is Rab Meir and Rab Shimon, are arguing about this. So I see that the argument between them is even when it's a nice and tam levgam right from the beginning. Amar Ula, so Ula responds to this question from Rav Chage. Chage loymede yediyeh mai ka'amri Rabbana. Chage does not understand what the Rabbanan are saying here. He's asking a question from this brayse. Tiyuftaka ma'isiv. He's asking a question from this brayse. It's not at all a question of my opinion. Hacha b'maya skinon. What is this brayse talking about? Kagoin shenafal atoich grisin saininen. That the wine or the vinegar fell onto the beans that when it was cold. And when it falls on the beans when it's cold, then it actually gives a good flavor. And then verticham. Then later he heats it up and now it's a bad flavor. So nasa kamishish biach leb'seif pagam. This is a case where it's considered that in the beginning it was a good taste and then later it was then it turned bad. And therefore, v'aser. Over here is where Rab Meir was saying that it would be aser. Only in this case is there a machlokes. But if it gave a bad taste from the beginning, then as Ula said, everybody would agree that it would be mutter. The Gemara is actually soon going to bring back this braise that Rav Chage asked from, and it's going to bring the braise in its entirety and actually show how Rav Chage's question was actually right. But first the Gemara brings that Rabbi Yochanan argues on Ula. Rabbi Yochanan says, when the food that's aser, that falls into something which is mutter, and it gives a bad taste from the beginning, that's where there's a machlekes, and Rab Meir holds even in such a case, it'll still be aser. Because according to Rab Yechanan, Rab Meir is learning out from what we see by the Kalim of Midyan, that even in such a case, it will be aser. That's when the machlekes is. Like we thought originally. Okay, so now the Gemara asks on this opinion of Rab Yechanan, the Shaila was asked, what was Rab Yechanan saying? The machlekes between Rab Meir and Rab Shimon is when it gives a bad taste from the beginning. But if in the beginning it was a good taste, and then later it goes bad. Over there, everybody would agree that it's also because of the good taste it gave in the beginning. Or perhaps bein bezu machlekes. The point that Rab Yechanan was saying is that they're arguing in both cases, whether it had a bad taste in the beginning or it went bad afterwards. In both cases, is a machlekes between Rab Meir and Rab Shimon. Teiku, the Gemara does not resolve this shaila. So this is something which is interesting. The Gemara here says Teiku, but the Gemara here is going to continue the discussion and look for a source of Rab Yechanan's opinion, and in the end it'll come out that the Gemara actually is going to bring a braisa that will prove like the first tzad of the Sibaya. It's not a usual thing that the Gemara should say Teiku, and then later on it brings a braisa, and the Gemara doesn't even say it, but you see from the braisa later that the pshat is going to be like the first tzad of the Ibaya. Amar Rav Amram, so Rav Amram said, Efsher, is it possible that Isa lahad Rab Yechanan, that this point that Rab Yechanan said is true, V'leitanyula b'masnitin, and there's no clear Mishnah that says anything about this? This is a big chiddush to say what Rav Yechanan is saying, that there's an opinion that says that when it's paigim from the beginning, it'll still be aser, and this should be somewhere in a Mishnah or in a Braisa. So nofak dog va'ashkach. So Rav Amram went out and looked to see if he could find a Mishnah as a source for Rav Yechanan said, and he found the Tanya or the Tanan we learned in a Mishnah. There's a Mishnah in Arla that says that sa'ir shel chulin shenafal atoicha isa. Leaven of chulin, or sourdough of chulin, that fell into a dough, v'yeshboi kedei lahachmitz, and this sourdough is enough to help this dough rise properly. V'echmitza, and this sourdough that fell into this dough caused it to rise. Then after this, v'achakach nofal sa'ir shel trumeh, and then a sourdough of trumeh, or a sa'ir shel klaya kerem, or a sa'ir from klayim, which is completely asur for anybody to eat. And now v'yeshboi kedei lahachmitz, and this also is able to cause it to rise, asur. So this dough will be asur to eat. Now what does this mean? It already rose from before. It had the sourdough of chulin that already caused this dough to rise fully and properly. And now when the additional trumeh or klaya kerem that falls in causes it to be machmitz even more, it actually causes a bad taste. It actually causes it to go bad because it becomes too sour. And still, what does the Tanakama say here? That it's going to be aser. But Rab Shimon matter. But Rab Shimon says that when the trumeh or the klaya kerem falls in, it already rose properly. So now what falls in is just causing it to go too sour, so it's going to be mutter. This is a nice tam levgam. So the Gemara says, or Rab Amram here says, so this Mishnah is a case, the paga meikarahu, that the additional sourdough of trumeh or klaya kerem that falls in, it gives it a bad taste from the beginning because it already rose properly, and now it's just adding more sourness, which is not good. Upligi, and I see that there's a machlokes here about whether this would be asr or not. So this is the source of what Rabbi Yechanan said, that there is an opinion that even if it's paigim, the taste is a bad taste from the beginning, there's an opinion that says that this would be mutter. That this would be asr, that is. There's an opinion that Tanakama, which is Rab Meir, says that it would be asr. But Rab Zera answers to this and says, no, the raya from this Mishnah is not a good raya. Why? Because Shani Isa, this Mishnah is talking about a case of a dough. A dough is different because Hayil Uruya L'chameya Kama Isa Sacherais. When you have the additional sourdough of Trumeh or Klaya Kerem that falls into this, even if it causes this dough itself to be very sour and it's not really edible, but it's not something which is necessarily negative. Because then you could use this dough itself now as a sourdough for other doughs, for a starter, for other doughs, to cause them to rise properly. So therefore, even if for this it's nice and tam of gami, you can't eat this, but it's still something that's l'shvach because it can be used for other doughs. And that's really the machlokes here between Rab Meir, the Tanakama, and Rab Shimon. Do you look at the taste of this itself and it's not edible, or do you say that since it's roy to be used for other doughs, then therefore it's still something positive, and therefore it's still going to be aser? Okay, so Toshama, the Gemara tries not to bring a raya from another brayse to the opinion of Rabbi Yechanan, that there's an argument regarding nice and tam of gam when they would paigim the taste from the beginning. So the brayse here, it's a brayse that says as follows. There are a few cases in this brayse. The first case is soishal truma vishal chulin. You have the sourdough of truma and of chulin, shenaflu l'teicha that fell together at the same time into dough, and bezekah de la'achmitz ubezekah de la'achmitz. Each one of them themselves would be enough to cause it to rise fully and properly. And v'chimtzu, and together they cause this dough to rise. And what happens? It rises too much. It becomes too sour because each one alone was able to cause it to rise fully and properly. But now you have the chulin and the truma that fell in, and so it causes it to become too sour. So the Tanakama says aser, and Rab Shimon mater. Rab Shimon says that it's mutter because it's paigim. It causes it to rise too much and it becomes too sour. Now, the second case, nafal shel truma tchila, if the truma falls in first and it causes it to rise, so it's actually giving a good, proper taste and rising properly. So that means that the truma, which is usher for any Yisrael to eat, is causing a tam l'shvach. So in such a case, if afterwards the chulin falls in and then it causes it to go bad, becomes all sour, divrei hakoil usher. Everybody would agree that in this case it's usher, because the truma that fell in the beginning did cause a good taste. It caused it to rise properly. So even though later on it's paigim, it goes bad when the chulin falls in and now it becomes too sour. This is a case where it was a good taste in the beginning, it was l'shvach, and then it became later l'vgam. And here everybody will agree that it's aser. So here's where you see that according to Rabbi Yechanan, in this case where it was shvach in the beginning and then later it goes bad, everybody will agree that it's aser. Not like what Ola said, that it's in this case that they argued. The Gemara will soon point this out. The third case here is nafal shel chulin v'achakach nafal shel truma. If it's the opposite, first the chulin fell in, and it causes it to rise properly and it has a good taste, and then afterwards the truma falls in, or shel klai kerem, or from a klai kerem it falls in, and then as soon as the truma and klai kerem fall in, they're causing right from the beginning a bad taste. It's rising too much and it makes it sour. Aser, in this case, the Tanakama says it's aser. Rab Shimon mater, but Rab Shimon says that even in this case it'll be mutter. It's not even. Sorry, Rab Shimon. The chiddush here is the Tanakama. The Tanakama is saying even though it's causing right from the beginning a bad taste, that it's still going to be aser. And Rab Shimon says it's mutter because it's causing the truma or the klai kerem that falls in from the beginning. It's causing it to rise too much and it's making it sour. So it's mutter. So now the Gemara proves the opinion of Rabbi Yechanan from this last case here, and this brayse. Now so over here in this last case, the pagamei kara, when first the chulin fell in and it rose properly, and now when the truma is falling in, right from the first second, it's causing it to be sour. It's not a good taste at all. Opligi, and I see that the Tanakama and Rab Shimon are arguing about this, so I clearly see, like Rabbi Yechanan said, that even when it's pagamei kara, there's an argument. Now, if you'll argue and you'll say, like the point that the Gemara already said before, that we could say, like the point that Rab Zayda said, that over here it's different because we're talking about dough, and even if it becomes too sour, for this dough it's not tasty, but you can use it for a starter for other dough, so maybe it's still something which is called l'shvach. So therefore, from here, there's no proof to the point of Rabbi Yechanan when something is sour from the beginning and there's nothing positive about it, that the Tanakama would still say aser. Says the Gemara, but I'll prove to you that that's not the pshat here. Tashama miseife. Take a look at what it says in the continuation of the brayse. And here the Gemara brings the continuation of the brayse is what was quoted before, Rav Chage, when he asked his question on Ula. What does it say there? It says, we learned before, hayayin shenofel oteicha dashim, wine that fell into lentils. Or forbidden wine, or the forbidden vinegar that fell onto split beans. Aser. It'll be aser. Rab Shimon mater. And Rab Shimon says that it's mutter. So the Gemara says over here in this case, it's talking about the wine and vinegar that from the first moment causes a bad taste. And there's a machlokes here, whether it's aser or mutter. So v'ha'achanami the pagamei kare upligi. It causes a bad taste, and they're arguing about this. So I see the point that Rabbi Yechanan says. Oh, so now here again, the Gemara addresses the point that Ula said before when he answered Rav Chage. We could say like the point that Ula said before when he answered Rav Chage and said, when it says here that the vinegar fell onto the split beans, what are we talking about? Not a case where it fell onto the hot beans where the vinegar causes a bad taste from the first moment. Rather, what we could be talking about over here is kashesh biach ula b'seif pogam. In the case where it fell onto cold beans, and it actually gives in the beginning a good taste, and only afterwards, when you heated it up, the taste goes bad. That's what the machlokes here is. So it's no source for what Rabbi Yochanan says that they're arguing even when it was a bad taste from the beginning. Also, but on this the Gemara brings, but umi pligi, how could you say that in this case, where it was a good taste in the beginning, and then later the taste goes bad, how could you say that there's an argument about this? Again, umi pligi, kishesh biach, ulibasayif, pogam, is there an argument in this case when it was good and then it went bad? But v'ha katani, what's the second case of the Braise that it said? Nafal shal truma tchila, if the truma, which is forbidden, falls first into this dough, and then afterwards, what happened afterwards is that the chulin fell in. Everybody's going to say that in this case it's going to be aser. Because what happens in this case, when the truma falls into the dough, it causes it to rise properly and it's giving a good taste. And then afterwards, when the chulin falls in, then it goes sour. So in such a case, it was mashbiach in the beginning, and later on it went sour. And over here it says that everybody would hold that it's aser. So over here, you clearly see that the point that Ula said, that this is the case where there's a machlekes, is not true. And elalav, so shmam, from here you can prove that bipaga meikara machlekes. Where's the case that they argue, Rav Meir, Rav Shimon, that argued about a nice and tam levgam, it's in a case where it gave a bad taste from the beginning. Shmam, so from here, from this braise, we have a clear ayah that that's what the machlekes is. And as I mentioned before, this also resolves the iboya that the Gemara asked before, that according to Rabbi Yochanan, they're only arguing in the case of paga meikara. In the case where it was a good taste in the beginning and then it went bad, over there everybody will agree that it's aser. It's interesting because over here the Mefarshim point out that over here in this case, the truma caused a good taste and then afterwards it goes bad because the chulin falls in. So it's only going bad because chulin fell in, not on its own, not naturally on its own. It's not a good taste, it then turned sour. It's because chulin fell in and it caused it to rise too much. But it's still considered to be a case where it was shvach in the beginning and then pagam, and then it went bad. Because we learned before, the Gemara said on Daf Samech Zayin, that the concept of noisen tam livgam applies even if what's causing it to have a bad taste is the fact that it's not seasoned properly, it's not salted, or the spices are not proper. That's also called noisen tam livgam. So the fact that over here later chulin falls in and now the dough rises too much and it becomes sour, that's also a case where it was a good taste in the beginning and then afterwards a bad taste. Okay, now the Gemara goes back to this braisa that we're discussing regarding the case of the truma and the chulin, the sourdough of truma and chulin that falls into this dough. And there's three different cases here in this braisa. The Gemara will explain what each case is coming to teach. So the Gemara, Hani Tlosa Bavi. The three cases here in this braise, diktani, that we have them lamali. Why do we need all the cases? And the question the Gemara is going to focus on is the first case. The first case where the chulin and the truma, sourdough, fell in together. That case seems to be extra. Why? As the Gemara explains, the last case of the braise, it's understood what it's coming to say. The last case is where what happened is that first the chulin fell in, and then the truma falls in. So as soon as the truma falls in, it's causing a bad taste because it already rose before properly from the chulin. So that last case that the Braisa says, it's understood what it's coming to teach. Kamash Malon, what it's coming to say is, Bepaigim me'ikare machlaikis. The chiddush here is that even when a case where the Isser is giving a bad taste from the beginning, there's a machlaikis between the Tanakama and Rav Shimon. Metzias, the middle case. Nami, over here as well, we understand what the chiddush over here is. And the middle case is where the truma falls in first, and it gives a good taste. Afterwards, chulin falls in, and now it goes sour. So over here, what's the chiddush? It's coming to teach that in a case where it gave a good taste in the beginning, and then afterwards it went sour, here everybody will agree that it's aser. That's the chiddush of the middle case. But Ela Reisha Lamali, the first case of this braisa, what's the chiddush in this case? So again, what was the first case of the braisa? Where the sa'ir, the sourdough of chulin and truma fall in together. And in the first case of the braisa, it's coming to say, it says that there's a machlokes, whether it's asur or mutter. What's the chiddush of the first case over here? So the Gemara explains the question. Again, because now, if in the last case of the braisa, where the truma that falls in is not at any moment causing any good taste at all, it's right away from the beginning, it causes a bad taste. Asri Rabbanon, so over there the Rabbanon say that it will still be aser. So Reisha, in the Reisha where the chulin and the truma, sourdough, fall in together, the kamashbach, where over there, the truma, there is a time period that it's causing a good taste. What happens when you have too much sourdough that's put into dough? And eventually it goes sour because it's too much, but it doesn't go sour right in the beginning. If you put in too much, it takes some time until it turns too sour. First, it actually causes it to rise properly, but because there's too much, eventually it goes bad. So in this case, where the chulin and the truma falls in together, in the beginning, it actually causes it to rise properly. And only afterwards it goes bad. So mipayeh, do you have to tell me that in such a case, the Chachamim, the Tanakama would say, or Rab Meir would say that it would be aser? Of course it would be aser, because in the beginning the truma was causing it to rise properly. So Abaye answers, you're right. There's no chiddush according to the Tanakama that in this case it would be aser. Reisha l'Rab Shimon itzrich. The chiddush of the first case of the Mishnah, when the truma and the chulin, sourdough, fall in together, the chiddush is according to Rab Shimon. And here the chiddush is as follows. V'hachi ka'amri Rabbanan l'Rab Shimon. This is what Rabbanan are arguing to Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon says that even when, Rab Shimon says that when it gives a bad taste, then it's going to be mutter. So the Rabbanan say, even you that say that when it gives a bad taste, it should be mutter, but in this case, you should agree to me. The Rabbanan are saying to Rab Shimon, Isazu, this dough that has the chulin sa'ir and the truma sa'ir that fall in together, so this dough, ru'uyo lahachmetz b'shtei shois. It would take 2 hours for it to rise. Now over here, a lot of sourdough fell in. So what happens? Mi garam lo shatachmetz b'shah achas. What causes that it rises quicker in 1 hour? Isser. Because there's also an isser that's here. The truma together with the chulin, there's too much. There's a lot of sourdough that fell into this, and therefore it causes it to rise quicker. But the point that the Rabbanan are saying is that even you that say that when it's nice and tam livgam, it should be mutter, but in this case, for the first hour that it rose, it was actually good. It rose quickly, and it was a good dough. It only went sour afterwards. So you should agree that in this case, that it should be aser. So just like Rab Shimon, we said before that Rab Shimon agrees. In a case where it was shvach in the beginning and pagam afterwards, Rab Shimon agrees that in such a case it should be aser. This is what Rabbanan are arguing to Rab Shimon, that in this case where the chulin and the truma falls in together, in the beginning it rose for the first hour, it was good. Rab Shimon should say that it's aser. So the Gemara now explains, what does Rab Shimon answer to this? Why does Rab Shimon hold in this case it's aser? Or again, why does Rab Shimon hold in this case actually that it's mutter? Rab Shimon will answer you, over here, this case is different because the truma never caused it to rise on its own. Even this, that it caused it to rise with a shvach, with a good taste, but never alone. It's together with the chulin. And then hishbichu, again, they both together caused the dough to rise, that is, and have a good taste. And and then later when it went bad, they're both together causing it to go bad. So the point the Gemara is saying is that according to Rab Shimon, if the Isser alone causes a good taste in the beginning, then I say if it goes bad later, it's still going to be Isser. But over here, the Isser never alone caused it to have a good taste. When it's rising in the beginning, it's rising together with the Chulin, which is Mutter, and therefore, in this case, Rab Shimon says it'll be Mutter. And then later, when it goes bad, it's for sure it's going to be Mutter. The Gemara asks on this. But still, Rab Shimon, why wouldn't we argue and say, according to Rab Shimon, litztaref, heter, ve'isser, bahadi, adodi, ve'litzer? Why does this matter? Why the fact that the truma, which is aser, and causing it to rise, and then together with it you also have chulin, why is the fact that chulin is together with the truma going to be a reason that this should be mutter? The truma itself is causing it also to rise. The fact that there's a chulin with it, why should that matter? It should still be asr if the fact is that the truma in the beginning is causing it to rise and actually giving it a good taste. Okay, so Taisus here actually points out that this seems to be a case of zeh v'zeh goyim. We had before in the Gemara and the Masechta a few times when you have two causes, a heter cause and an isser cause, that we paskin actually that in such a case it's mutter. Over here you have this se'ir of truma and the se'ir of chulin that falls in together. They're both causing it to rise together, so l'chayre it should be mutter. But Taisva says the reason why our case is different is because zeh v'zeh goyim is when you have two causes that each alone cannot cause the result to happen. In this case, the truma dough or the truma sourdough in itself is strong enough to cause it to rise properly. So therefore the Gemara is asking if the sa'ir of truma is strong enough, the fact that there's also chulin there with it should not matter. Even if b'payil now, the chulin and the truma are causing it in the beginning to rise together in 1 hour instead of 2 hours, but since the sa'ir of truma in itself could cause this to rise, it should be aser according to Rab Shimon. So the Gemara answers, Rab Shimon l'taimei. Rab Shimon follows his opinion. The Omar Rab Shimon says, Afila iser ve'iser, nami loy mitzdarfi. Rab Shimon says, anytime you have two things together, even if they're both that are aser, but they're two different isurim, and if they're together causing something, a taste, or it's mixing into something, they don't combine together to cause an iser. Where we see this, the Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, or this is a Braise, the Tanya, it says, Ha'arla, u'klaya kerem, mitzdarfim. The Tanakama says, if you have two different isurim, like Arla and klaya kerem, they could combine together to cause an iser. Rab Shimon says, Ei mitzdarfim. You can't combine together two different isurim. So according to Rab Shimon, if you can't combine together two different isurim, so definitely if you have the sa'ir of truma, which is asr, or klaya kerem, together with chulin, which is mutter, if now they are causing together this dough to rise in 1 hour, it doesn't combine together to say that there's an isser that's giving the taste, the tam, the shvach. It's causing it together with the chulin, and therefore it's going to be mutter. This is the conclusion of this explanation of the machlekes here between Rab Shimon and Rab Meir. Now the Gemara brings an incident that happened. Hahu achbere, there was a mouse, the nafal lechavita de shichra, that fell into a barrel of beer. So Asrei Rav lahu shichra. Rav said that now this barrel of beer will be asa to drink from it. Amru Rabbanan kamei Rav Sheishes. So the Rabbanan said over this psaktin of Rav in front of Rav Sheishes. And they said, Neime kasava, shall we say that Rav holds that noisin tam livgam aser, that when something gives a bad flavor and it's aser, and it gives a bad flavor, that it'll be aser. Here you have a mouse that falls into beer. The mouse is giving a bad flavor to this beer. So shall I say that this is aser? Amalu Rav Sheishes. So Rav Sheishes says no. Here it's a different story. Really, Rav follows the opinion that if it gives a bad taste, it'll be mutter. But v'hacha, the case of this mouse is different. Chidushu, b'chlal, the fact that the Torah says about a mouse that it's aser to eat, there's a chiddush in this. What's the chiddush here? Because the hamimis mouse, a mouse, even without the Torah saying anything about it, it's something which is repulsive. No person wants to eat a mouse. Ubedili in shimine. People separate from this. And nevertheless, the Torah has to come and write the fact that it's asa to eat it. Why is the Torah writing that it's asa to eat from this, from a mouse, together with other kinds of shkotzim or masim, that anyways a person would not eat from it? Elamai, the reason is the Torah wants to come and tell you a chiddush, that it's different than everything else. That although this is something which is repulsive, but the Torah is saying the isser anyways. So hilkach, the mouse that falls into the beer, is an exception, and nice and tam levgam nami yaser. Even when it gives a bad flavor, it'll also be yaser. That's a chiddush in this case. That's how Rashi learns pshat over here. That this is a chiddush because people anyways would not eat from this. So there was no reason for the Torah to even say it. Taisa says a little bit different. Taisa asks on Rashi. Taisa says that what the Gemara is saying is that since a mouse only gives a bad flavor, and we had before the rule, we learned out from the pasuk, from the Vela and Ger, that the Isser, Bechlal, of food is only when it causes a good flavor. So then, by a mouse, it's a chiddush. The fact that the Torah says that that it's still aser, it's against the rule that the Torah usually says. So from here we see that this is an exception. by the shkotzim and ramasim that the Torah says they are going to be aser even when they give a bad taste, even nice and tam of gam. So Amr le Rabbanan Rav Sheshes, when the Rabbanan heard this explanation from Rav Sheshes, they asked him, so Ela Mayate, if so, litame lach v'yavish. Another halacha regarding the shkotzim and ramasim, besides the fact that it's aser to eat, that also causes tumah. But if you're saying that there's a chiddush here regarding the shkotzim and ramasim, you could say it according to Rashi. The pshat is the same point that the Torah says that if you touch shkotzim and ramasim, it'll make you tummy. Why did the Torah have to say this? Who's interested in touching shkotzim and ramasim? Anyways, people stay away from this. So the fact that the Torah says the whole tumah by shkotzim and ramasim is a chiddush. So if it's a chiddush, so then I should say that it's different than all other tumas, and you should be tummy whether it's moist or whether it's dry. Not like all other trumas where the rule is that it's only mitama when it's moist. Allah metanan. So why did we learn in a Mishnah that says mitamin lachen, that the shkotzim and ramasim causes tuma only when it's moist, but they mitama yaveshim doesn't cause tuma when it's dry? If it's taki, if you're saying that it's a chiddush and it's different, and the Torah is coming to warn regarding this, to say that it's going to be aser anyways, so then the rule of the difference between moist and dry should not apply here. So Rav Sheshes answers, so following your reasoning, Shichva Zara, which is also the semen that causes also tumeh, it's also something which is repulsive, and it's not necessary for the Torah to say, and the Torah says that it causes tumeh, so I should say Tatami Lach v'Yavish, that the Torah is coming to say the Chiddush, that it causes tumeh, and it should cause tumeh, whether it's moist or dry. Allah metnan, why does it say there in that Mishnah, metamin lachen, ve metamin yaveshin, that it causes tumah only when it's moist and not when it dries up? So you see over here that this distinction that you're trying to say, that even by tumah, we should say this chiddush, that it's metama both dry and moist, does not apply. So what's the answer? What's the answer regarding Shichva Zera? That Shichva Zera, Omer Achmana, the Torah uses this term of Shichva Zera. What does it mean? Beru'uya lahazriya. That means only when this Zera is moist and it still has the reproductive powers to it, that's what the term Zera means, then it can cause tumah, not when it's dry. So Hachanami, therefore, we see as well regarding Shkotzim and Ramasim, when the Torah says that it causes tumah, the lashon of the pasuk is b'maisam Omer Achmana, that it's a dead carcass of this shkotzim, that's when it causes truma. So what does the term b'maisam mean? Ke'en maisam. Only when it's in its condition as it is when it dies, which is when there's still moisture to it, not when it completely dries up. Maskef lo Rav Shimi min Erda. Rav Shimi of Nerda asked B'chlal on the whole discussion here that we're talking about this mouse that fell into this beer, and he asks Umi mas. We're having a discussion about this, and our assumption is that when a mouse that is falls into beer, it's repulsive, it's mos, and it causes a bad taste. But he asks, is this something which is mos? And you're saying that this is a chiddush, that the Torah was mechadish. It's actually not something which is mos. A mouse is something that is served, and it's even served of tables of nobility. Apparently, this is something which people serve it and eat it. So how are we saying that this is something which is a chiddush, that the Torah was mechadish, and therefore it's different? So Rav Shimi ben Erda answers and says, like kashir, it's not a question, it depends what we're talking about. Ha b'didabra. Here, we're talking about the mice that are in the dabra, that are out in the field. Rashi here actually says, askro balaz. It sounds like Rashi is saying that we're talking about a squirrel. A squirrel is something which is people eat it. It's served. It's food. And ha but the masa. But when you're talking about those mice that are crawling into your houses that are very repulsive, that's something that we were talking about till here. That is the chiddush of the Torah, and that's what Rav Sheshes was explaining. Omar Rava said about this case, and Rava had a different take on this whole story. He says, Hilchase, the halacha is Noisen Tam Levgam is mutter. That when a Issa gives a bad flavor, it'll be mutter. Now, V'achbara b'shichra, this story about the mouse that fell into the barrel of beer, Lo yadaina my time of the Rav. I'm not sure how to interpret what Rav's opinion here is when Rav said it was aser. And he didn't accept the pshat that Rav Sheshes said before. So Rav said, I'm not sure what the pshat here is. Maybe Rav is of the opinion that Isa that gives a bad flavor, that it'll be aser, and therefore he aser this beer. And the less hilchas was saying, if that's the case, we're not going to paskin like Rav. Mishum de Kesava, Noisen Tam Levgam Mutter. Rav holds that if it gives a bad flavor, it'll be mutter, but maybe Rav was held Va'achbara Bishichra, the mouse that falls into the beer, Ashbuchi Mashbach. It actually causes a good taste. It adds to the flavor of the beer. It's not a bad flavor. And therefore Rav was saying that it would be aser. So he didn't. So Rav actually didn't agree to what Rav Shesh's pshat before, and he says he's not trying to learn the pshat in what Rav said regarding this.